I walked into my room to find Jake sprawled across my bed, his feet hanging off the edge, with Lila sitting next to him, laughing at some dumb inside joke. They looked up at me, startled, like I wasn't supposed to be there. "What the hell are you two doing in here?" I asked, my voice barely able to mask the surprise and anger. My heart was pounding. This was my room, my space that I paid $500 a month for. "Oh, hey," Jake said, brushing his hair out of his face like he didn't just hijack my entire life. "We're just chilling in your room. Didn't think you'd mind. It's not like you're ever here anyway." I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to process what was happening. "What?" My voice was shaking now, but I tried to hold it together. "Why the hell are you in my room? What is this? Some kind of joke?" Lila, who had been quiet up until that point, looked at me with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable. "Your parents said it was fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said we could stay here for a little while." I felt like the ground had just opened up beneath me. My brain couldn't catch up. My parents had let them move into my room? My parents, the people I'd been paying every month to live here, were just letting Jake and Lila, who were in their late 20s like me, take over the space I was supposed to call my own? My fists clenched at my sides, and my face grew hot. "What do you mean they said it's fine? You guys can't just take my room. I pay for that." Jake shrugged, not even looking up from the screen of my laptop, where they were watching some dumb movie. "They said you wouldn't mind. You've been gone all the time, right? You hardly ever stay in here, and it's not like you're using the space." He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, like this wasn't some major violation of everything I thought I understood about respect and boundaries. I felt the anger building up, but I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to flip out right there, but I also didn't know how else to react. "Jake, this is my room. I pay $500 a month to live here. Not for you and Lila to just crash in it like it's a hotel. Why are you guys here, in MY space, without even asking me?" I was starting to lose my cool, but the words were spilling out now, desperate and confused. Lila finally spoke up, her voice soft, like she was trying to calm the tension. "It's just temporary," she said, glancing at Jake. "We're between places, and your parents said it would be okay until we can figure things out. We didn't mean to make you mad." I turned to Jake, eyes wide. "How long have you been here?" I demanded, my chest tight. Jake finally paused the movie, finally acknowledging me with more than just a dismissive glance. "About a week, man. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Chill out. It's just until we find something else." I felt like I was losing my mind. A week? They'd been here for a week, living in my space, without telling me, without asking me, without any respect for the money I was paying to have a room that was supposed to be mine. "A week? You've been here a week, and my parents just let you stay here? Why the hell wouldn't they tell me?" Jake's expression shifted, becoming more defensive. They didn't think it'd be a big deal. And honestly, we didn't either. "You're never here, man. You're always working or out with friends or whatever. It's not like you use the room much." I could feel my blood boiling. "That's not the point, Jake. It's my room. I'm paying for it. I don't care if I'm here 5 minutes a day or 5 hours a day. I paid for that space, and you have no right to just move in." Lila, who had been silent for a moment, finally spoke again, her voice barely audible. "We didn't want to cause any trouble. Your parents said they didn't think you'd mind, and they told us it was okay. We're just what? Taking over my room?" I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. "This is insane. I don't care what my parents said. I'm paying rent for that room, not you guys. And if they think it's okay for you to just live here, then I need to have a conversation with them." Jake rolled his eyes and flopped back onto the bed, clearly over the conversation. "Dude, relax. It's not like we're staying here forever. We're just in a tough spot, and we didn't want to impose on anyone else. Your parents said we could crash here for a bit, and that's what we're doing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents didn't even bother to give me a heads up? They didn't think I'd mind? I wasn't just some background character in their life to be ignored. I was paying to be part of the family, to have my own space. But somehow, that didn't matter. With my heart pounding and my thoughts racing, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the room, my mind already spinning with what I needed to do next. This was far from over. I wasn't going to just let it slide. The more I thought about it, the more I realized my parents weren't being upfront with me, and there was something more going on here than just Jake needing a place to crash. But what? Why hadn't they told me about this? What were they hiding? I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a much bigger problem, one that would tear my family apart and force me to question everything I thought I knew about loyalty, trust, and what it meant to be part of a family. I wasn't sure what I expected when I confronted my parents about the situation with Jake and Lila, but I definitely didn't expect what happened next. I had hoped, even in my anger, that they'd at least acknowledge how ridiculous it was for them to let my older brother and his girlfriend take over my room without asking. Instead, when I sat down in the living room that evening, both of them looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, we've already talked about this," my mom said, not even looking up from the stack of bills she was sorting through on the coffee table. "It's just temporary. Jake and Lila are going through some stuff, and they needed a place to stay. It's not like they're doing anything wrong." "Doing anything wrong?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Mom, they're living in my room. I'm paying you $500 a month for that room. It's not just a couch to crash on. They're taking advantage of me, and you're just letting it happen without even asking me." Dad finally spoke up, and his tone was more dismissive than usual. "You're overreacting. It's only been a week, and they've been really respectful. You're hardly ever home anyway. It's not like you even need the space all the time." "That's not the point, Dad," I shot back, frustrated. "I'm paying for that room. I'm not just letting them walk all over me. You're treating me like my money doesn't matter, and that's not okay. You could have asked me first." My mom sighed, and I could tell she was getting irritated. "We didn't think it would be a big deal, honey. They're family. We're just helping them out." "Family? You're saying that like I'm not family too," I said, feeling a knot in my stomach tighten. "I'm paying rent for that room. This isn't charity. It's not about just helping them out. This is my space, and you can't just let anyone take it whenever they feel like it. You need to talk to me before doing something like this." My father looked at me with an exasperated expression, like I was the one making everything difficult. "We didn't think it would be a problem, all right? You're being overly dramatic about this." "You're seriously saying I'm dramatic right now?" I shot back, a cold anger bubbling up in my chest. "You're the ones who've been disrespecting me, acting like my room doesn't matter. You're throwing my brother and his girlfriend into my space without a second thought, and now you're calling me dramatic? I'm not just going to sit back and let you treat me like this." My mom shook her head, clearly done with the conversation. "Look, we're not having this argument again. They're staying here, and you'll just have to deal with it for a little while. It's not going to be forever." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't even listening to me. They were dismissing me, telling me to just deal with it like it was nothing. The more I tried to stand up for myself, the more they made me feel like I was the one in the wrong. It was infuriating, but I didn't know what else to do. They weren't going to change their minds. The next few days were a blur of tension. I tried to avoid the situation as much as possible, staying in my room when I could, but I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. Jake and Lila were everywhere, taking over the house, using my things like they belonged to them. It was hard to ignore it, and it wasn't helping that my parents were so blatantly dismissive of my feelings. Every time I tried to talk to them, they brushed me off. "It's just temporary," they'd say. "They're family, and we're doing what we can to help them out." But the more they said it, the less it made sense. If it was just temporary, why did they have no plan for when Jake and Lila would leave? Why weren't they giving me any kind of time frame? It felt like they were stalling, avoiding the issue. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something they weren't telling me. It was Jake, of all people, who first dropped a hint about what was really going on. I was sitting in the kitchen one night, trying to get some peace and quiet, when he walked in and started rummaging through the fridge. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel the tension between us. Finally, after a long silence, he looked at me, his face suddenly serious. "You know, it's not just about the room, right?" I furrowed my brow. "What are you talking about?" Jake leaned against the counter, his eyes avoiding mine. "I mean, yeah, the room is part of it, but things aren't as simple as you think. You're mad at Mom and Dad for letting us stay here, but there's more going on. You're not the only one who's been feeling like they've been taking advantage of you." I blinked, caught off guard. "What are you saying, Jake?" He hesitated, then sighed. "It's not just about me and Lila needing a place to stay. You know that, right? There's something going on with them. They're in debt, a lot of debt, and they've been hiding it from you. My heart sank as his words hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean, debt? How much? Jake looked over his shoulder, making sure no one was around to overhear. I don't know all the details, but I've overheard them talking. It's bad, man. They're behind on bills, on the mortgage, on everything. They're struggling to keep the house, and this whole thing with us staying here, it's their way of buying some time. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing. Everything about this situation suddenly felt different. It wasn't just about the room. It was about something much bigger. My parents had been hiding something from me, something important, and now I was left trying to make sense of it all. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I didn't know how. I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't want to put everything on you. But I'm just telling you now because you deserve to know. You're being treated like the bad guy in all this, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. It wasn't just a simple case of me paying rent for a room anymore. My family had been lying to me, and I had no idea how deep the lies ran. Jake had just opened a door I didn't know existed, and now I had no choice but to walk through it. But where would it lead me? And how would I ever be able to trust my parents again after this? The next day, I didn't know what to think. Jake had just dropped a bombshell on me, and now I was stuck trying to figure out what it all meant. My parents had been hiding their financial struggles from me, and it felt like my entire reality had shifted in an instant. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was that the real reason they let Jake and Lila move into my room? Were they desperate enough to do whatever it took to keep up appearances and avoid dealing with their money problems? I needed answers, but I didn't know where to start. I couldn't exactly go to my parents. They had already shut me down once, and I didn't think they were going to suddenly open up to me about their finances. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to approach them again, but every time I walked into the house, the tension was unbearable. Jake and Lila were still there, taking up space and acting like nothing was wrong. My parents were acting like everything was normal, going about their daily routines without acknowledging the elephant in the room. It was as if they were all pretending nothing had changed. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend things were fine when I knew they were anything but. It wasn't until I had a conversation with my dad that things started to unravel even further. It happened one night when I came home late from work, exhausted and fed up with the whole situation. I was about to walk into my room when I noticed my dad sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that made you feel like something was about to happen. I paused, trying to figure out if I was ready to confront him again, but I knew I had to. If I was going to understand what was going on with my family, I needed to hear it from him. I cleared my throat as I walked into the room. Dad, we need to talk. He didn't look up, but I could tell he'd heard me. About what? He asked, his voice almost too casual. I could feel my frustration building. About what's really going on. About the money. About the house. About Jake and Lila. This time, he didn't dismiss me right away. He took a long breath, finally turning to face me. Look, I don't know how to make this easier for you, he said, rubbing his hand across his face. Your mom and I didn't want to worry you. We thought we could handle it on our own, but we've been struggling. We didn't want to drag you into it. I stood there, feeling like the world was closing in on me. How long has this been going on, Dad? Why didn't you tell me? He looked away, like he couldn't face me. A while. A lot longer than we should have kept it from you. The bills have been piling up. We're behind on the mortgage. Utilities, credit cards, everything. We've been scraping by, trying to make ends meet. But it's been tough. And now, well, now we're trying to keep it together. He paused, his eyes flickering with guilt. Your mom didn't want to tell you. She thought it would be too much, and I didn't want to make things worse. My heart was pounding as I processed his words. My parents, the people I thought I could rely on, had been hiding this from me for who knows how long. It wasn't just the room or the money I was paying. It was everything they'd kept from me. How long were you planning on keeping this a secret? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We didn't want to burden you, he replied, his voice soft. You've got enough on your plate with work and everything. We didn't want to add to that. But I guess we should have told you sooner. I felt like everything was crashing down around me. My mind was spinning with questions, and there were so many things I didn't understand. So, This whole thing with Jake and Lila is just a cover-up? You let them stay in my room because you needed the extra space, the extra money. I asked, the words feeling like they were being ripped from my chest. He hesitated before answering. It's not just about the room. It's not just about money. It's about keeping the house. If we can't make the mortgage payments, we lose everything. And we didn't know who else to turn to. Your mom thought it would be a temporary thing, but we both knew it was getting out of hand. I thought maybe if we kept it all quiet, we could find a way out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just that they'd taken advantage of me. It was that they'd put everything, including their pride, before me. The family had become a house of lies, and I'd been living in it without even knowing. The anger I felt wasn't just about the room anymore. It was about the years of secrets, the years of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, speechless, trying to process it all. Before I could say anything else, my dad stood up and walked toward me, his face filled with regret. "I'm sorry, son. We should have been more open with you. I know it's a lot to take in, but we didn't want to drag you down with us. We were just trying to keep things together." I didn't know how to respond. I was hurt, angry, and confused all at once. "So, what now?" I finally asked, my voice low. "What do we do now?" He looked down, clearly not sure himself. "I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We have to." At that moment, I wasn't sure if I could trust him again. Everything had shifted, and I didn't know how to move forward. But one thing was clear. This was far from over. The truth was out, but there was still a lot more I needed to understand. Jake's words echoed in my mind. There's more going on. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I had a feeling it was just the tip of the iceberg. My parents had been hiding their struggles, but there was more underneath the surface, and I wasn't going to rest until I figured it all out. The following week felt like a slow, suffocating march towards something I couldn't name. The weight of what my dad had told me was still pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe, but I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just pretend everything was fine again. I knew the truth now, but the more I learned, the less it made sense. Jake's warning, the hint about more going on beneath the surface, lingered in my mind, but I hadn't had the chance to dig deeper. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. I had confronted my dad about the financial mess, but even after the truth came out, there was still so much left unspoken. There was a part of me that wanted to just walk away from it all. Maybe I wasn't meant to fix it, but something kept pulling me back in. That Friday, I got home late again, feeling more exhausted than usual. Work had been a nightmare, and the tension at home was palpable. Jake and Lila had been acting like everything was normal, but I could see the strain in their eyes. My parents were doing their best to act like nothing had changed, but it was clear to me that they were trying to hold on to something that was slipping through their fingers. When I walked through the front door, my mom was sitting in the kitchen, staring at her phone like she was waiting for something. I almost turned around to leave, but then I saw her expression. She wasn't upset, just lost. I didn't know what it was, but something felt off. So, I sat down next to her. "Mom," I said, my voice softer than usual. "You okay?" She glanced up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't place. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, and I felt like she was deciding whether to speak or not. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. "I don't know, honey. I'm just trying to figure out what to do next." "What do you mean?" I asked, sensing that this was more than just about the financial mess. "About the house?" She nodded, her hand trembling as she set her phone down on the table. "About everything. About us. I don't know what happened or when it happened, but I don't feel like we're a family anymore. We're just surviving. We're not living." I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. It was hard not to feel responsible for a piece of what was going on, even though I knew deep down that it wasn't just my fault. The situation had been building long before I came along, but still, I couldn't ignore the fact that my parents had put me in the middle of it. "Mom will figure it out. I'm not going anywhere. I just want us to get through this." She gave me a sad smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know you're trying, honey, but sometimes trying isn't enough. I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if we can go back to the way things were." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Jake walked in, looking agitated. I didn't know what had happened, but his mood was off, his face tight with anger. Lila followed him in, and she looked just as unsettled. They exchanged a brief look before Jake slammed the door behind him and stormed into the kitchen, his face a mix of frustration and exhaustion. "I can't believe this," he muttered almost to himself. "Jake?" my mom asked, her voice shaky. "What's going on?" He didn't answer at first, pacing back and forth like he was trying to work through something in his head. Finally, he turned to face us, his eyes burning with frustration. "You guys need to start being honest with me. I'm not an idiot. I know something is going on. You're lying to me. And it's not just about the money anymore." My mom's face paled, and I could see the tension mounting. She opened her mouth to say something, but Jake cut her off. "I overheard a conversation today. A big one. Something about a second mortgage and some loan sharks." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I could see my mom's face drain of color, and I realized that Jake hadn't just stumbled upon something small. He'd uncovered something huge, something that neither of my parents had told me. I looked between the two of them, waiting for an explanation, but my mom stayed silent. Dad wasn't home yet, and I wasn't sure if I was relieved or terrified of what he'd say when he walked in. "Loan sharks?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "What are you talking about? What kind of trouble are we in?" Jake clenched his fists, clearly trying to hold himself together. "I'm not the one who should be explaining this. You two need to be honest with me. I'm not a kid anymore. I can handle it." "Jake," my mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please. It's not what you think." But Jake was already shaking his head. "No, you don't get to lie to me anymore. You've been lying to all of us for too long, and now it's catching up to you." "I didn't know how to tell you," my mom said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to make it stop. I can't keep living like this, pretending everything is okay when it's not," Jake shouted, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I'm tired of it. I'm tired of watching you both fall apart and act like we're supposed to keep everything together." I didn't know how to respond to any of it. Everything was spiraling, and I was stuck in the middle, unsure of who I could trust. I looked at my mom, who was now crying quietly, her face buried in her hands, and then at Jake, who was standing there, his body rigid with frustration. Lila hadn't said a word, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The sound of the front door opening interrupted the tension. My dad walked in, his face unreadable. The moment he saw the scene in the kitchen, his expression changed, and he closed the door behind him slowly. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cold. "Dad," I said, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk. Right now." The air was thick with tension as my dad walked into the kitchen. The moment his eyes landed on my mom, Jake, and me, his posture stiffened. He stood there for a long moment, his hands still on the doorknob, as if he were trying to decide whether he could walk away or if he was trapped in this moment with us. But he didn't walk away. Instead, he sighed deeply and let the door shut behind him. There was no turning back now. The silence in the room was deafening, and I could feel my heart hammering against my chest. This was at the moment where everything we'd been avoiding was finally going to come to light. "Dad," Jake said, his voice sharp. "It's time. We're done pretending." I could see my dad swallow hard. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. He opened his mouth like he was going to speak, but nothing came out at first. He was lost for words, and I couldn't tell if that was a sign of guilt or fear. The silence stretched on until he finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "I never wanted you to find out like this. I never wanted to drag you into it. But the truth is, I've been trying to fix it. Fix everything." "You've been lying to us," Jake shot back. "The money, the bills, the house, and now loan sharks? What the hell is going on, Dad?" His words hit like a slap. I had been holding on to this small thread of hope, this belief that maybe things weren't as bad as Jake was making them out to be, but hearing it from him made it real. My father had been keeping us in the dark about more than just money. This was more than a bad investment or a few missed bills. We were in deeper than I had imagined. "We didn't know how to tell you," my dad muttered, his eyes darting to my mom. "We didn't want to add to your stress. I thought I could figure it out on my own." "Figure it out on your own?" Jake repeated incredulously. "We're your family, Dad. You don't get to handle everything by yourself. You're not alone in this, and you shouldn't have kept it from us. All this time, we've been living in this house, paying bills, going on like everything's normal. Meanwhile, you're drowning, and we had no idea." My mom's sobs were quieter now, but I could see the pain on her face, the realization that we were all paying the price for her decision to stay silent. She couldn't look at either of us as Jake and Dad went back and forth. There was a level of betrayal in the room that I didn't know how to process. For so long, I had blamed Jake and Lila for taking my room, for being the ones who ruined everything. But it wasn't them. It was our parents. It was their decisions, their secrets, that had led us to this point. We were trying to keep you out of it, Dad said again, his voice more desperate now. I never wanted you to have to worry about these things. We're doing the best we can, but it's not easy. You have no idea how much I've been trying to keep everything together. Then why didn't you tell us sooner? I asked, my voice strained. You could have come to us. We could have worked together. But instead, you kept this secret, and now look at us. We're stuck in the middle of all your lies. I didn't want to burden you, Dad replied, his eyes finally meeting mine. I thought if I kept it hidden, we could fix it without anyone finding out. I didn't want to make you feel responsible. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Responsible? You're telling me you didn't want me to feel responsible? After I've been paying for my own room for months, while Jake and Lila move in, and I'm just supposed to pretend nothing is wrong? This isn't about being responsible, Dad. This is about trust. You kept us in the dark, and now you want us to fix it. My dad looked like he was about to say something, but he stopped himself. He looked defeated. I had never seen him like this before, never seen him so broken. My mom, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke up, her voice fragile but firm. I never wanted it to be like this, she said. I never thought it would come to this point. You should have said something, Jake said, his voice shaking with anger. We could have helped you. You didn't have to go through this alone. None of us had to. My dad's face twisted with guilt. I didn't want to ask for help. It felt like failure. I didn't want you to see me like that. It was a painful truth to hear. I had always looked up to my dad, always thought of him as the steady one, the one who could handle anything that came his way. And to hear him admit that he had been hiding everything from us because he didn't want to look weak, it shattered something in me. We weren't just dealing with a financial crisis. We were dealing with a family that had been falling apart for a long time, and no one had known how to fix it. There was a long silence after that. No one knew what to say. We all stood there in the kitchen, the weight of everything settling over us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but I didn't. Instead, I just stood there trying to process everything. Jake was pacing now, clearly frustrated, and my mom was wiping away her tears. My dad seemed lost in his own thoughts. His shoulders slumped as if he had finally accepted how far things had gone. Dad, I said quietly, after the silence had stretched on for too long. What's the plan now? How do we get out of this? My dad looked up at me, his face filled with a mixture of regret and determination. We can't keep pretending, son. We got to face it head on. We need to talk to the bank, make arrangements. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll fight for this house. We can try to work something out with the loan sharks, too. It won't be easy, but we have to try. I nodded slowly, but there was a feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. I didn't know if the house would survive this. I didn't know if our family would survive this. But one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. We're going to get through this, I said, not just for them, but for myself too. I wasn't sure I believed it yet, but I had to believe it. There was no other choice. We had to face it together, or we would fall apart. That's when I realized sometimes the truth isn't easy to accept, but you can't move forward until you face it. And maybe, just maybe, we'd finally start doing that.